Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. It's the fourth Wednesday of the month and that means it's time for our Bird Notes program. And joining me as always is Mark LaBarr, conservation biologist for Audubon, Vermont. Great to have you with us, and you've brought a guest with you. I
have indeed. Always great to be here, Judy. I'd like to introduce Peter Ross. He's our new executive director down at Audubon, Vermont. Peter joined us in May of last year after our previous executive director moved on, and we had about a 6-month search period, and Peter's been with us, I guess, about 6 months now, so we figured we'd bring him onto the show and have him talk to us a little bit about himself.
Awesome. Well, thanks. It's great to have you here, Peter.
Thank you very much.
Tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, I grew up as a young boy in Burlington, lived there until age 9 or 10 when we moved down to Washington, D.C. And my family had always kept Vermont as its roots. And so grew up in Burlington, spent a great deal of time down on the Lake Champlain where we have a family camp, running around the lake, hiking the mountains of Vermont. And Vermont, for me, became part of my soul. It's a wonderful community, and back in the early 2000s I moved back to Vermont and then joined Audubon Vermont 6 months ago yesterday.
Well, is that right? Wow.
Wonderful organization. The opportunity for me that was really engaging about the opportunity to come to Audubon was education, conservation, and Vermont. And for me to be able to make a contribution to that is just a wonderful opportunity.
Let's talk a little bit about the center, which is located in Huntington.
Yeah, and you can talk a little bit too. I know, Peter, your family farm over in Heinsberg is very similar to the center. We have the Green Mountain Audubon Center, which I talk a bunch about oftentimes when we're here. It's about a 250-acre parcel down in Huntington. And, Peter, you can talk a little bit about, it's kind of got some of the similar features that your farm does.
Yeah, I spoke about education, and one of the driving pieces for me at Audubon is education, how that plays a role in the lives of all of us. As a kid or young adult, adolescent, we had a maple sugaring operation on our farm. We have one old school at Audubon. It's a building that's 60 years old, and we still collect the syrups and the buckets. And that for me I was thinking about coming here today, and I can remember a picture of me drinking sap out of a bucket back in probably the 50s or 60s. And that opportunity to connect kids with place is huge, particularly as we think about how we steward the earth. So when the similarities between our farm and Audubon, we look at Camel's Hump. Camel's Hump is right there in Huntington. We've got the educational programs that abound and try to connect all sorts of ages with the outdoors. I look at the outdoors as an educational opportunity.
It's interesting, I think, as a parent, when my kids were little, we tapped, I think, 3 maple trees, and the kids had a real appreciation for how much work it takes to produce maple syrup, and there isn't a time that goes by when my son doesn't have maple syrup and think about that and say, oh, remember that time we boiled all that sap?
It is, and I actually, what was nice this year was I actually got a chance to be in the sugar house and do the boiling. For all my previous years, a lot of the time I was out there and just gathering sap and splitting wood and stuff like that. So I got to stand around and watch sap boil. And one of the nice things about the Audubon is that we do have this diversity of habitats that are down there. You saw the picture of the Beaver Pond that came up, which is a big one. It's something that we use a lot when we do a lot of our program. As Peter mentioned, we have education programs. Here's our Beaver Pond. It's changed a little since this picture was shot with some of the flooding that went on this past July, but it's a great place for us to bring the kids right out to an area and to talk about beavers and talk about wetland communities and to talk about birds, since that's what we're kind of all about. How many, I do the bird thing, so I don't keep track of everybody. How many kids that come through every year through the Audubon
I would
Center?
say on an average year at least 3,500, which
that's incredible.
And it comes from schools all over, schools and preschools and elementary schools, middle schools, high schools.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the programs. I mean, you were talking about the beaver pond, and we saw the picture of the kids looking around. What do they learn from looking at a beaver pond?
Well, you know, it's funny because there are different programs for different ages. So, you know, I've walked by, and I don't do much of the education. I do the bird stuff, but I've walked by the our ed staff, which is awesome. And, you know, they'll be standing there dressed up as a beaver or have the kids dressed up as a beaver. They do a lot of pond scooping. You know, you have access to those things, catching anything. It's, you know, a lot of hands-on stuff. Having something like that. And then you can take a 5-minute walk and you're in our sugar woods, and another 5-minute walk and you can be out in some of our fields. The sugaring program is one of our major programs that we do. We do it old school, as Peter suggested. We don't use pipeline. We have it all on bucket. And in the springtime, during sugaring season, our educators are, you know, from the start of the day to the end of the day, teaching kids about sugaring and also integrating some of the bird habitat work that we do there, as far as trying to look at how we can manage sugar woods for birds. And in fact, we just recently received some money to put that out there to some of the sugar makers to help them manage their sugar woods a little bit better for some of the bird species, which are priorities here in the state. What
are some of the habitat types?
Well, like I said, we have our fields, we have our beaver ponds, we've got the woods up on the hillside. You know, we do a lot of management there, not a lot, but quite a bit. This is actually me sitting on the brush hog. We keep our fields open and manage for early successional habitat. With the center, we use it kind of as a demonstration site. Not kind of, I mean, it is right out there.
Really speak to that.
Yeah.
I think that's important for people to know.
You know, here's an example of a logging operation that we did on the property this past year. Again, we're looking at managing our fields and our forests for birds. So we have a program called Foresters for the Birds, and this is a group of, you know, Vermont state foresters out there learning about appropriate forest management that will promote what we call vertical structure, will promote mature forest that allows a lot of these songbirds, ovenbirds, wood thrushes, things of that nature to really take advantage of it. So folks can come out to the center, they can see how we manage our lands, and we use it as, like I said, a demonstration site so people get an idea of what they can do on their properties.
I know you've been talking about the center, but what about other places around the state that you're involved in?
I'm going to go here, Peter,
yeah,
just because this
totally
is my,
good.
as folks know, I mean, I've been in here long enough, and for folks that do watch across the fence, they have probably heard me talk about our Common Tern Recovery Project up on Lake Champlain. I've been doing that now for roughly 25 years, 26 years, and we work with, on the lake, partnering with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department to protect the tern nesting islands. You can see this tern, it's a regular roosting space, so by the end of the summer, they don't necessarily keep it all that clean for us, but this is one of our buoys that we put around the islands to protect the terns from, you know, folks landing on the islands and disturbing the birds. So that's up on Lake Champlain. Here's a little tern chick. We work to protect those so we get good reproductive success.
And how many islands do you?
Well, we've got Pop Squash Island and we've got Rock Island. Those are the two islands that we work on. Both of them are up in the inland sea. So right around Swanton, St. Albans Bay are the two. And then there's a couple more that the terns use sometime. But this year we reached about 270 breeding pairs on Lake Champlain. And we're hoping it'll go through the process, but that will downlist the bird from endangered to threatened in Vermont. So we kind of reached a milestone this year with the population increasing. When I started, there were less than 50 pairs on the lake, and we're now up to about 270. So that's been good. Pete, you could talk a little bit about the other statewide project that we do with the falcons.
Yeah, Peregrine Falcons. Back in the 40s, with the introduction of the use of the pesticide DDT, we lost effectively all our peregrine falcons in Vermont. And I believe it was 1982, 93 different birds were introduced to Vermont, and in 84 there was the first breeding pair. And this is a feel-good story in its best sense. In 2005, we have approximately 30 pairs, and we have 30 pairs of stable breeding pairs, 15 fledglings this year. And we've been, the peregrine is still monitored, but it's been removed from the endangered species list. And I think both of these instances that we're talking about here is a reflection of the citizen science approach that Audubon really encourages. And thanks to the volunteers throughout the state, this has been a highly successful program.
So Pete's right. I mean, Margaret Fowle and Kathy Wolford are the two biologists that work with us on the Peregrine project. These pictures, by the way, are from Steve Fascio. And Margaret's been working with the peregrines for years, both of them. And we did have a few more chicks than just 15 this year, but we do monitor only 30 nest sites. But most of those sites are being monitored by volunteers, dedicated people that Margaret coordinates that go out to these sites and try to not only see whether the pairs are nesting, but then to try to determine how many chicks are coming off. And you can see that little picture there had a bunch of those peregrine chicks. They look a little bit different than their parents. But what those volunteers do is sit, and sometimes long hours, with a scope and a pair of binoculars, just waiting to see these chicks pop their head up so they can get a count.
I think it's interesting we talk about these programs, but people really have no idea exactly how much work and how many hours go into these kinds of efforts.
Yeah, I mean, it's as Pete said, it is a feel-good piece. We've been able to move these two species, the peregrine falcon, off the endangered species list, and now the common tern, probably down to threatened. It does take a lot of time and a lot of effort. Audubon, Vermont is part of the National Audubon Society. We're a state program. It also takes a lot of funding. As I said, we get a lot of our funding through grants and stuff. We partner with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. They're the ones that fund both the peregrine and the tern work, as well as some other stuff. And we have our membership in the state. I can't remember how many members we had across the state.
Well, over the course of time, we've had as many as 10,000 members, and that's always something we want to focus on and actually encourage new membership and maintain what we currently have.
Yeah, so it's all those folks, helping out. We've been doing work with our chapters. There are 6 or 7 chapters in the state of Vermont. They're their own nonprofits, so but they work with us to, again, that citizen science component, just getting out there and being able to rely on
Mark, one of the things I think some people are probably unaware of, that Audubon Vermont is a nonprofit, and we are dependent upon fundraising to be able to support the programs we offer to the public and the Forest Bird Initiative, or the Champlain Valley Bird Initiative. And that funding, just as a pitch here a little bit, comes from state and government grants, as well as private foundations, and from Vermont population. It's just the citizens. And any gift goes directly to supporting what we're all about, and that's conservation and building stewards of the earth.
And we also work up and down the Atlantic coast, up and down the flyway. Myself and my coworker Jim Shallow, he heads up National Audubon's Eastern Forest Project, and I head up the Eastern Grassland and Shrubland Project. So we coordinate the other state programs up and down the flyway as far as conservation work as well. So our impacts are not only here in the state, but we sit pretty large when it comes to the 8 other state programs, all the way down to South Carolina and Florida, New York, Connecticut. We're the ones that help coordinate that whole flyway-wide approach to bird conservation.
So the real interesting piece that a lot of people probably don't know, that there are 4 priority projects in the Atlantic Flyway. Vermont is the creator of 2 of those, and that's the Forest Bird and the Champlain Valley Bird. And Jim and Mark are the leaders behind that. And that's just, for me, it's something to really be proud of. Vermont, this tiny little state, once again leads the way. And what Mark hasn't said is that he's and Jim have worked up in Canada and down in Latin America as well. So we're, local but international. That's something to be proud of.
Yeah, and I've actually, some of my work, which has been nice about Across the Fence and working for Audubon, is I've had plenty of pictures and stories to tell.
Great stories.
Yeah, when I come on the tube to talk to the viewers and everything like that, and to you as well. So.
Well, we're coming to the end of our program, and so obviously one of the things that you do is answer viewer questions. So if you have a question for Mark, you can pass it along. You can contact him at Audubon Vermont at the address on your screen, or if you prefer, you can contact Mark by email. His address is mlabarr@audubon.org. Send Mark your questions, and hopefully he'll have some answers for you on the next edition of Bird Notes. Thank you both for coming in today.
You're
Thanks
very
very
welcome.
much.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.
For a video copy of today's program, call toll-free 1-888-ATF-3430. Across the Fence is brought to you as a public service by University of Vermont Extension and WCAX-TV.